So our keynote speaker today, Dr. Kaveh Madani, is a Henry Hart Rice Senior Fellow at the Macmillan Center for International and Area Studies at Yale, and former deputy head at the Iranian Department of Environment. As an environmental scientist, educator, and activist, his work has gained international attention for its incorporation of game theory and decision analysis for water resource management and conflict resolution. So please welcome Dr. Kaveh Madani.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. As always, I'll enjoy talking about water. I know how much effort you have put into this summit. Congratulations to you and your colleagues for organizing such a successful summit. I'll be sharing some of the insights that I gained throughout the years, through my career, moving from engineering to policy and economics, and later on working for some period as a policymaker in a developing world. With the experience of working in the developing and developed countries, I think there are some important things that we are missing and overlooking. And if we want to address the world's environmental problems, we have to be aware of those. So let's see if I can add anything to your knowledge. And it's the third day of the gathering, the meeting, and you have already heard others talking about this. But let me reiterate that the world is water bankrupt. The total demand of humanity and the total consumption is more than the renewable rate of water. Of course, there are still some places which are water rich and have plenty of water, but in most places we have managed to run our systems bankrupt. And when I say bankruptcy, remember this: we have exhausted our surface water, our checking account. When we run out of our money in our checking account, we go to our saving account. Our saving account is groundwater that we inherited from our ancestors. We have also exhausted that in many places around the world. That is why right now we are seeing groundwater decline in many places. And because the rate of use is far more than the rate of renewal given to us by nature, this sort of bankruptcy problem cannot be solved unless we first admit that we are bankrupt and then adapt and think about big things. Let's look at the world. If I had the chance of manipulating the world's the country sizes around this planet based on water use, this would have been the result. Look at Africa, look at South America, and look at East Asia and North America. Canada is not there almost, but you look at the US. This shows the magnitude of water use in some places. Look at the Middle East, still is very big. Of course, population is included in this, and there are countries like India and China that require a lot of water because they have huge population. However, we are seeing that there are some countries which don't have such big populations, but still their water use is huge. And when we say water use, it means agriculture, means industry, and so on. But let's look at domestic water use. Some of the countries that we thought would be big got smaller when we look at their domestic water use. Though North America, the countries in Europe, they are using plenty of water for domestic water use, and the rest of the world mostly are using other sorts of water, agriculture for food production that we eventually buy. For the food that they produce and we eventually buy from them. That's the unfair world in let's say. And look at Africa. There are places that people don't have access to clean water. Many people still on this planet don't have access to water, and this was something that I think we learned in a better way during this pandemic when people were issuing instructions on how to fight this pandemic and how to stay away from the coronavirus. The first advice was wash your hands. and they're without paying attention to the fact that there are a lot of people, billions of people, who don't have access to clean water and sanitation, and they can wash their hands with clean water. Industrial water use. Look how things change. Again, this is something very, very important here. Africa, almost not there. Middle East is gone. South America is not there. And you see northern Europe, you see Europe and North America. See how big they got. Of course, China is industrialized in some countries in East Asia as well. But the change of the sizes between my slides should give you a good lesson here. The way the world functions at the moment is that the rich countries use their water in their industrial sector and sell the products of their industry and service sectors at a very high price. And in return, they buy food from the weak economies, which is priced, which has a very low price. So virtually, the industrial countries, the world stronger economies, and the nations which have better livelihood because of better income also buy, and I don't want to call it an abuse, but it's an unfair trade in a sense when it comes to water. So you sell your industry and buy their cheap food, and that is why, and water. And that is why they still have not been able to change their economies, and this gap has continued to get bigger and bigger. And now look at the size of the agricultural water use. All of a sudden, East Asia, Middle East get bigger. Europe gets very small. Canada is gone. The Northern America gets smaller. And this unfair trade. Now, on this unfair trade has a major role, because on one side we have farmers, subsistence farmers, people who are poor and can't afford a better life, and on the other side of the planet we have us. We are sitting here enjoying our time and making advices and wanting other nations to take action, to do things, to care about climate change, to mitigate, to change their style of living and such, without paying attention to all these complexities that are in this game and the unfairness. So global water bankruptcy is going to continue to grow, and food scarcity is another issue that we will have to experience. And right now with this pandemic, the third wave of the pandemic actually is going to affect food production in the world. And because of the issues that we have, because the poor get affected by the lack of food, we have to be really scared of this. Now, you see this problem of water scarcity is not unique to Middle East or North Africa, the dry areas of the world. Australia is having issues. There are places in South America we have issues. Also in Mexico and West United States, we are having issues. Scarcity is a serious thing. Part of it is because of the climate. So you can see in at this level, we are seeing a lot of countries having the same problem. And if we go toward the north and toward the south, there are not as many. The problem is not as bad, but it also depends on how we use our water and how we treat it, and what part of economy is relying on the water sector. Now, we know that water is used mainly in food production. Then when 70% of the world's water goes to the agricultural sector, food is eventually low price. It doesn't reflect the cost of environmental damages that we cause. It doesn't reflect the price of food or the value of water that is embedded in the process of food production. The world is becoming is showing interest in red meat, and meat production has continued to grow. Countries which get richer, nations which get richer, they like to eat more meat. It takes time before we get obese and develop interest in beyond meat and vegan diets. So meat production is having a huge role in this transition and making water more scarce. We also have the issue of energy, water and energy nexus, right? And we continue talking about it. And we miss the fact that some of the renewables that we are very excited about are also water consumptive. And although they might help us reduce carbon emissions, they can have huge water footprints. A good example is biofuels. So, like, they use 70 to 400 times more, their water footprint is 70 to 400 times greater than conventional fossil fuels. And if we continue with this trend in the next 2 decades, just the energy sector would require a lot of more water. Still, many countries in the developing world, China, Middle Eastern leaders, and countries in South America are very interested in expanding their hydropower capacity. Hydropower is another good example where, it's called a renewable source, but it comes with a lot of consequences. So we are seeing these trends around the world, lakes and wetlands which dry up because of consumption upstream, because of our lack of attention, because we don't care about the importance and the role of wetlands and water bodies in balancing the ecosystem, in creating in giving health, in making the ecosystem healthy. And every time we fail, we then, through mistakes, we learn that, oh wow, that wetland had a major role, and now let's restore it. But it's really hard to restore things once you have damaged them. Ecosystem, it's not a joke. And it's not even, it's about wetlands and natural water bodies. Even the reservoirs that we have made. This is an example of a reservoir of a city that even reservoirs that we have built are going dry because by building reservoirs, by building infrastructure, we have not been able to solve the problem completely. Because the problem of water is not only the supply and demand problem. And every time you increase supply in a region, we have learned by experience that every time we increase supply in one region, we increase dependence and increase demand subsequently, and we promote development in that region. So some regions become even thirstier, and this vicious cycle continues. The other major issue that we are aware of, and what we dismiss a lot of times, is the issue of people who have to spend hours for accessing water. This issue of imbalance that we have. Children and women are the biggest victim of this issue, what we call there are two types of scarcity: physical water scarcity and economic water scarcity. Physical is when we hit the limit. The nature doesn't have more water to offer. But the economic water scarcity is another major issue. We have people or nations who cannot use their water resources because they can't simply afford building infrastructure. And this issue exists. And despite all these discussions we have about mitigating environmental problems, doing this, making the world a fair place, protecting human rights, we are not doing much on that regard. So there are people who compete, who spend time, who spend hours. And as I said, women and children are losing hours and a big part of their lives, and suffer a lot under the sun, walking a lot and such, just to gain access to water. Basic thing. And if you recall, when we talk about domestic water use, our domestic water use on this side of the planet is huge. We feel it's a given thing. We never even think about it twice. We never thought about it when they told us to wash our hands. We never thought that there are people, many of us didn't think that there are people on this planet who don't have that luxury. There are farmers who lose their jobs, who migrate and commit suicide around the world. The rice that we eat, the food that we eat, a lot of times have sources in other parts of the world. We never know where they come from. We don't know the stories of those people, the stories of those farmers, and what happens to them. We don't pay the price of their hardship and their suffering. We don't compensate them for that. And let's not forget, the biggest cause of environmental problems the biggest driver of environmental problems this world, including climate change and all other problems, is consumerism. And this is something we are not fighting against strongly, because there is the issue of conflict of interest. Selling more creates more jobs and income for companies and for many places. So it helps the economy, and then consuming less can be a big threat to that, and then there would be a conflict of interest. So with that, there is no food. So even the people who have been producing our food would suffer from hunger, because they don't have food, they don't have water to grow food for themselves. And that's really an unfair game. We go around the world. This is my home country, Iran. Lake Urmia in northwest Iran, similar to the Aral Sea, we dried it up. It was one of the largest hypersaline lakes in the world. And because the government decided to divert the water which was flowing into this salt lake to cities and to agriculture, then over time, with this big lake got smaller and smaller and smaller, and the process was very fast. And now it has become a bed of salt and a bed of dust, and it affects the people in that region. It has damaged the ecotourism. It has damaged the livelihood of people, and even threatens its health. And of course, when we kill any wetland, when any river shrinks, their ecosystem is damaged. And when people are thirsty, it's really hard to fight for the environment and allocate water to the environment, because thirsty people and hungry people don't listen to you. So this new problem of dust storms is a growing problem. We have experienced it in the United States many years ago, and the economy of the United States gave us the chance of learning from this mistake and changing the development path and development course and address this issue. But the Middle Eastern countries, which are going through war and conflicts and so many things, cannot address this problem effectively, cannot address it immediately. And the dust travels around the world. Now, those who are closer to the dust beds, they get cancer, they die, their operations are stopped, their life is affected. But this problem is continuing. In our discussions and in our discourse about environmental problems, we don't talk much about this. And now we have the issue of environmental security and water security and environmental justice and peace building and all these things. We are seeing wars. I'm not claiming that water was the cause of the Syrian crisis, for example, as some claim, because I don't think this is true, but definitely it was a catalyst. Drought caused bankruptcy. People lost their jobs. Farmers lost their jobs, had to leave their lands, and then increased tensions come with the process of migration and living in suburbs and so on. And this is the problem we are seeing. And a lot of people in the West, in the global North, are concerned about the downstream implications, security implications of water bankruptcy. But what I'm concerned about and try to promote and remind people is that we also have to be seriously concerned about the water implications and environmental implications of insecurity problems in that part of the world. It's not, we can talk about 2050 and the problems that can arise from environmental degradation, but let's not forget that the environment is degrading because these countries are going through tensions, they're under sanctions, they have wars, they have lots of problems. And the people who are dealing with lots of problems have no capacity to address the environmental problem. Look at us during this pandemic. Look at us when we were fighting for toilet paper at Costco and Walmart, standing in lines fighting for toilet paper. At the time we were doing that, none of us cared about 2050s and the end of this century. And it's hard to convince people to think about and talk about and care about climate change in a lot of these places. If you're hungry, if your children are starving today and tonight, are you going to care about the future of this planet? Are you going to stop hunting and killing and stop using water and wasting water because of the future, when you have no hope in what's going to, in the future, in the near future, and you don't know what's going to happen to you? And this is the issue with this pandemic as well. When the pandemic started, lots of environmentalists started celebrating, saying that, oh, this is teaching us lessons. We are going to change our attitude. This is helpful. But I totally think the opposite, and I have been discussing that a lot of times, and I've been writing and alarming about this, that this pandemic is causing an economic crisis. And when countries go through economic crises and recessions, their capacity and bandwidth to address environmental problems would shrink. And indeed, this pandemic can cause some irreversible damages. Yes, we have learned our lesson. Yes, we can talk about it in academia and in rich places, but would we make the world, would those countries which saw this pandemic, which saw countries fighting over masks and medical equipment, and soon might see a fight over vaccination and other problems, and see the world is not that fair, would they think about addressing this problem altogether? Plus, let's not forget that the industrial world and the best economies and the stronger economies are the ones who have caused this problem in the first place. So the problems we are seeing are the combination of both climate change and our anthropogenic impacts at the local level. This is another important thing. There is a need to understand what is happening also on the ground, not to blame every problem on climate change. Indeed, many leaders in the developing world love to do that, love to talk about climate change, because then they are not liable. They're not going to claim responsibility for the things they have done on the ground and the problems they have created in their territories, like drying lakes, as I said, drying wetlands and so problems. Now, the World Economic Forum and some major think tanks have done surveys, and people have been talking about water shortage as the number one security risk, the number one risk to the world, and the problems that can arise. I don't think these sorts of assessments are good. This is what the experts think. This is what the thought leaders think. But at least at this point, we can't debunk that, because we didn't see in our worst projection of the future, we didn't see this pandemic. We didn't talk about it. We never saw this event, this global event with this magnitude, with so much effect on politics, economy, and the health of people. So water is a major risk, but is one of the other risks together with the other things. And we shouldn't forget that there are problems in every sector, and we don't know which one would fail sooner than the others, but any of them which fails will affect the other ones. Now we have problems in the health sector. They're started in the health sector, but they were not stopped there. They affected every other sector. The problem with the world is that we don't know this. I don't know, for some reason the animation is not working, but we don't know when the tipping point is coming. We don't know when there will be a failure. The failure can be, a year ago, we never thought that there would be some sort of a tipping point, some sort of a problematic, some sort of intrusion in our equilibrium that we were enjoying for years, for decades. And this is the issue of there is an issue with predicting tipping point, when they come and when they will affect us. We don't know. So what do? The world is uncertain. I'm talking about trade-offs. I'm talking about complexity and connections and everything. Then what can we do? Because it's just a sad scene as I'm portraying it today. Now, there is hope. We are in the fourth industrial revolution. We now have access to huge data. We can compute, we can measure, we can monitor remotely, and we can take a lot of actions. There are things that we're doing today which were a dream for us just 10 years ago, how fast we're computing, how fast we're impacting, how fast we can do things, how fast we can communicate, how fast we can release news and inform people and educate people and so on. But This is the fourth one. We had three other industrial revolutions before, and every time we create, like, we did a revolution, we thought we have solved the problem, and we failed. Now we can compute, we can calculate, we can measure, we can do, run all these data sets, data mining, machine learning. All these things have come to our help. We can do a lot of good things with them. That's why the innovation in that industry is fast. It's really hard to keep up with. Your phone, after a year or so, becomes outdated, becomes slow. Your computer becomes slow. Everything is happening at a very, very fast pace. Now, I think if you look at my PhD dissertation and the model I developed there, and how much time I spent then, and how much time I was, how long I was waiting to run my models, you will laugh at me. It's a joke for you. It might be, my PhD model might be an assignment of a graduate course today. But this is how, on the positive side, we are making improvements. Now, we are measuring, we are computing, but this is the problem of the world. This is a major problem. We can data mine, we can come up with correlations, we can use machine learning, we can guess, but data points can be very confusing, can mislead. In this election, in the United States, we learn how wrong our surveys can be. And this was not the first time we did surveys, because we collect data points and we make projections based on data points. What if our data points are wrong? What if the correlations, what if the reasoning behind our suggested correlation is wrong? Our projections can be wrong. So there are lots of ways in which the data that we are collecting can lead to different narratives. Now, the narrative we develop can be based on our mental biases, information chambers, and places we belong to, the communities we belong to, and sometimes we are coming up with misleading conclusions. And that is why there is a chance for unintended consequences, like the previous revolutions that we invention of energy and mechanics of motors and engines and all these things were positive. We have made a lot of improvements. Development came because of this. We are in a better condition today, but it also had a huge cost. The environmental damages we are seeing today have been caused by these problems. So these problems are real. And every time we thought that we have done it all and we are successful and we are perfect, we can solve the problems. My point here is that we have to get rid of our arrogance. We have to understand that we don't know much. If anything, this pandemic has taught us in the scientific community that we I don't want to say know nothing, but we know a little about how the world functions and might function, because none of us did see this. We talked about it. Now we can go and look at our papers and say, oh, someone said there is a health risk, someone said there is this, but we didn't talk about it. We didn't go to TV. Even when it started, people were dismissing it because it was the Eastern problem, it was a Chinese problem, it was something belonging to the global South, it was Iranian problem, and then gradually it came toward the West, and then it became an issue, a serious issue. The problem we have is something to think about, and I think this is something actually coming from the MIT School of Management, linear thinking and nonlinear thinking. The problem we have in the world is that we function based on linear thinking. We engineers, we scientists, we are trained, and we keep training our people to think linearly. And by linearly, I don't mean not using nonlinear and complex equations, but I mean the process of thinking, that we present a problem, we say this is the problem, and this is my desired solution. Come up with a solution. This is my desired outcome, desired space, desired future, and come up with a solution. And then we implement our solution, and we think we have done a good job. In some fields it might work. If you want to make a pool in your backyard, it can function, it can work. Still though, that pool might, building that pool and constructing that pool in your backyard can have some feedback, can have some consequences in the long run. But many times when we implement things at a large scale, there are many unintended consequences. Now, unintended consequences by nature are hard to capture. It's really hard to understand that they exist, that they are there. But if we think nonlinearly, if we think about the possible problems, the possible unintended consequences, then there might be a chance to revise our solutions, to not be quick. Again, I want to share an example from Iran. The city of Isfahan in central Iran is in a basin called Zayanderud River Basin. And this basin has a high population. It's agriculturally significant. There is a lot of farming is going on there. The industrial use is big, so it has all the elements, and there is a wetland at the end of this basin, which is a Ramsar preserved wetland, and unless you have enough water in your system, at the end of the terminal, this terminal system, your wetland would not function and remain healthy. And this is what we are seeing. Not only we are seeing that in at the end of the basin, but also upstream. Because we saw water shortage in this basin, engineers like myself and technocrats came up with the idea of transferring water from other locations. This is a very popular idea today in Brazil, in China, in the Middle East. And it was a popular idea in the US West. Look at California, all the water transfers in California. It was a popular idea for a long, long time in the developed world and now in the developing world. The Iranians have doubled up the volume of water in this river through water transfer from other basins. Though this is the scene most of the year, a river which is dry, even though it has water coming into it from other places. And this city's identity, a former capital of Iran, a historic city, is tied to water. Imagine what happens if Thames goes dry in London. The city that has tied its identity and culture to water loses its major source. It causes depression. It causes lots of conflicts and problems. Conflicts, downstream people asking for more water, and upstream people or people in donor basins are nervous about losing their water. Then we see pipes blowing up, we see fights, we see discussions, we see protests, we see some politicization of this problem, and even using it in a wrong way and using it for other ends, because it's a tension in the country. It's something that people are worried about, and once these tensions start, once demonstrations start, they can go out of control, as we have seen today. Now, let's look at the argument that I made about linear and nonlinear thinking distinction. So in linear thinking, this is how we thought. There was water shortage, water scarcity. We tried to fix it by interbasin water transfer. There are other methods as well. Build a reservoir, dig a well, dig a deeper well, desalinate, go get water out of air. So all these technological solutions for addressing the problem, they're good. They can be part of our solution portfolio, but they're not a complete solution for our problem. So they're incomplete. You have to supplement them with other things. So we try to balance it. We increase water supply, and that's how engineers think, how consultants function, how we work, and how scientists think. What we didn't think about was when we increase water supply, then we promote watershed development. We promote migration to this place. We create this wrong perception of water availability, and we increase water demand. And with the increased water demand, again, our problems comes back to us, because we only treated the symptom rather than the main cause, and then we created unintended consequences. Now, this problem, if you have infection in your body which is causing headache, if you have, let's say, the COVID-19, and your body's infected with COVID-19, and you have headache or other symptoms, and all you do is taking painkillers, not understanding that there are other things to be that must be done, or there are other medicine that you have to take. If you have infection in your body and all you do is taking Tylenol and painkillers, then you are not addressing the infection. The infection must be addressed through antibiotics. And if you don't do that, then your body would eventually collapse, because the problem is getting worse and worse. So symptom management is the cause. Now, if you replace our linear thinking with nonlinear thinking, go look at the work, the MIT work on this and the system dynamics group there. Really useful, really helpful. And look at, if you do that, then when we come up with the solution, we also think about the possible unintended consequences. We talk about with others and take their feedback and understand that this is also part of the problem solving process. We have to internalize the externalities. We have to think about other sectors. It's not, water is connected to so many other things. So how can you come up with a solution and in the water sector and think there is no impact and effect? The pandemic is also teaching us that. Oh, you say stay at home, and then you're like, no, don't stay at home because our economies are failing. Get out. You get out, and then again, people are dying. The health system is collapsing. Go stay at home, and then this cycle continues, because yes, the problem can be solved within one sector, but there are impacts on other sectors, and there are feedbacks, right? That's why it was easy for doctors and medical doctors and people in that sector to immediately come up with the solution of shutting down, stopping everything, and going home. But the leaders, the presidents, the prime ministers had a hard time making that decision, because that decision could impact other things. It wasn't like they don't understand, they're stupid, they're naive. It was about thinking about everything together. Now, in this situation, what we know is that we will make mistakes. We will make problems. We will cause problems. Our ancestors did that. Previous generations did that. And the smartest people in those generations made mistakes or did things which caused unintended consequences. And whatever we do today will also have unintended consequences. But if we understand these uncertainties, if we understand these trade-offs, we'd better try to minimize the chance of the unintended consequences and solve one problem without causing new ones. We must lose our arrogance. We must admit that the uncertainty is huge and we can't do much. Something, an article we have written a few years ago about what sustainability means and how that our understanding of sustainability can affect our decision. If you get a chance, you can download it from my webpage, and I think it's even free access if you need it. Now, let's go to the water system. We say water systems are complex, and I keep talking about complexity with you. But when I started working on this, yes, first and still, for many people, my colleagues, water is their whole world. And we understand that this whole world is very complex. My whole world is very complex. So there are trade-offs and there are other things. And when I'm talking about water systems, I'm dealing with bounded rationality. I can't understand the whole system. I can't make the best decision. There are causal relationships. There's huge dynamics in it. You move one thing and then other things are impacted. And now we are talking about the issue of non-stationarity, that we have seen only 100 years or 50 years or 150 years. That's how long our record is. But the world, life has been longer on this planet. And what if we don't know? What if our statistical calculations are all wrong because we only have a tiny bit of, small sample of the reality, and the future might not look like the past. So we have limited predictability, and because humans are involved, there is evolutionary behavior. People behave in different ways. No one could think that people would fight over toilet paper. Why not fighting over coffee, which is more essential than other things? So when I work, though, in real world, when I negotiate, when I teach public policy, water is a small system compared to so many other things, the world, which is even more complex than this. So water, which was my world, is part of a tiny part of a larger complex systems that I have a hard time understanding. Now, I talk about nexus. We talk about the connection with other sectors, environment, energy, and growingly we understand and admit that those connections exist. Natural scientists, water scientists, hydrologists talk about it, but the world is much bigger, as we have seen in the case of this pandemic. Health is important, economy is important, employment is significantly important for any government. How the Wall Street looks like, and how the trends in Wall Street can determine the future of politics and the health of the economy, and so. Defense is important for the politicians. So then in this world, water is a small thing. Now, if I'm a policymaker, if I'm a president, how do I make decisions? I make decisions because I have to prioritize things over each other, because I have a limited time and I have limited resources and limited budget and limited staff, limited experts. So then the issue becomes the issue of finding out if your issue is both urgent and important. If they're both, relatively speaking, compared to other things, both important and urgent, this is my suggestion of simplification of how policymakers think. So if it's both urgent and important, this is, by the way, the Eisenhower box, it's called, and you can use it for prioritizing your tasks. But in public policy also, I think it has an application. If they're both urgent and important, then you address it first. If it's not relatively important and non-urgent, you forget it. If it's urgent but not that important, then you delay it, or you ask other people to address it. If it's non-urgent but important, then you prepare for it, you talk about it, you come up with plans, long-term plans, and so. Where is water located here? In the best case, I think water is, no matter, in my heart, it's here. But in reality, in practice, for the society, it's important. People know it's an essential element of life, but it's not an urgent issue, especially if the world is going through circumstances like this. Health was not the urgent issue to many of us just a year ago. Now, the value of extreme events must be understood here. If you want this to be changed, you have to change the sense of urgency in societies and sense of importance. Now, extreme events do that. When there is a fire, when there's a huge drought, when there's a flood, people think about water, talk about water, take actions on water, pass bills on water, do things about water, allocate budget to water. Now, if those things, they don't exist, we don't talk about it. Now, this is very risky if you want to rely on the extreme events to come and change our attitude. The extreme events which come and change the political cost of reforms and make things easier for the policymakers. It's scary if you do that. But so if you don't want that, then we have to change things. Climate change is the same thing. We don't feel that sense of urgency in many places on this planet because I told you, people are bankrupt. People don't have access to water. People lose their jobs. People are going through wars and sanctions and now through a pandemic. So we don't understand this urgency. Now, in case of climate change, we have talked a lot about it, not much about water in a way we have done it for climate change. Now, how do we change this problem? All we can do is, if we want to internalize the externalities, we have to get rid of arbitrary boundaries. Water is not about water only. Water is related to so many other things. Water is income, water is life, water is employment, water is dignity, water is pride of your nation. Water is lots of things that you have to understand. Even if you're talking about geographies and transboundary systems, we know that water is not stop at the border. You can not build a wall like our president likes to stop water. If you expand your boundaries, then you realize that there are opportunities for trades. You can, when water is tied to other things, then that means that you can do trades. You can give water and buy oil or connect the problems together, as we have seen countries doing it. But this is the way to go, because otherwise then you're dealing with zero-sum problems. Because if the upstream nation or upstream user gives up its his or her water or their water, then the downstream will win. It's a win-lose game. But if there are opportunities for trades, then the issue is different. And if we understand these connections, we realize that there are opportunities for trades. Now, another thing we have to stop doing is that we have to understand that the world is not as perfect as we think. The world members, the beneficiaries of the environment, us, are not as cooperative as we think. When we talk about people and nations, we talk about diversity and all these things. When it comes to making a prescription and coming up with a solution, we all of a sudden assume that societies help, cooperate, do things together to address the problem. Yet see the election results right now, 70 plus millions of votes for a president with a sort of mentality, with wanting less cooperation with the rest of the world, with not caring about the environment, with lots of other things. This is what we are seeing in the world because those people exist. And cooperative solutions that we assume cannot be implemented because we assume there is a God in charge. This is Kaveh Madani, an academic sitting in New Haven and making prescriptions for the rest of the world. The world should be doing this. They have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, use less water and all these things. But in reality, people don't listen to me because they all have their own objectives. They all have their rationality models and their own good reasons. So a fireman who saves lives and a terrorist who takes lives both have their own rationality models, which to us might seem good or bad. And hopefully, in the terrorist case, it's a bad action and bad thought, but that person has justified things for himself. Politicians are the same way. You think they're stupid, you think they don't understand, but they have their own rationality models. They have their own objectives. And we have to respect these things, these people around us. We have to see that 70 plus million people in the United States want Donald Trump and his thinking and Trumpism. So those people exist in this society. And it's not only in the United States, it's also in the rest of the world. So these people exist. And if you want to come up with solutions, it's not enough. And I put my own pictures here that as a politician, as a diplomat, as a person in, talking about water and environment and COP negotiations, climate change negotiations, it's easy to set targets. It's easy to shake hands. It's easy to take photographs and talk about the future and the good things we have to do for this planet. But we don't talk about pathways. We talk about the Paris Agreement and the good objectives of the Paris Agreement. We don't talk about how to get there because the politicians don't talk about substance. They talk, a lot of times we talk about process, and we are concerned about processes, not substances. And that's another paper to have a look at. But let's take advantage of this industrial revolution without being overconfident. Let's take advantage of this computational capacity, which lets us do lots of things, which lets us innovate, which lets us come up with new technologies and help people even remotely from where we are sitting, get people connected to the grid, give them a better life conditions, and then with monitoring, with understanding, let's do things in a better way. But let's understand that computation is not equal to understanding. Collecting data is not equal to understanding. And as we have seen in the case of surveys and polls and all these things that we have done and came that were wrong. So this sort of opportunities that we have will help us do things better, detect problems faster, respond faster. But at the end of the day, my last message is that we have to understand that the water system is what human water systems are greater than the sum of their parts. In fluid dynamics, we teach students that water only flows downstream. Water only goes from a higher elevation to a lower elevation. In economics, we teach our students that you do things only when they're economically justified. You do a cost-benefit analysis and you take action. But you add politics to this game, the whole thing will change. Why am I saying this? Aristotle, when he said it, he meant it in a positive way, that bright minds can come together and do a lot. And that's true. But we also have to understand that it's not enough to understand part of the system and do things in separate rooms and do our analysis in separate rooms and want that we combine all these things, we get to take a sum of these things and we solve the problem. No, once you add these things together, the whole thing can look different. And unless you understand this sort of complexity, you cannot really take actions. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, thank you for the really informative talk. So we have a bunch of like Q&A questions and I'm trying to summarize them. So one of the questions is talking about how do we think about like better communicating the complexity and how do we integrate institutions to solve these sort of problem? Is it some sort of restructuring and to incorporate system thinking or this nonlinear thinking into governance? What ways can that be done?
So here's the thing. It's a great question. Communicating complexity is not easy to people. And when systems get too complex, the human mind is always after one cause. We want to know the cause and address the cause and solve the problem. When the problems get complex, it's hard to detect the cause. Indeed, we say that complex problems don't have one single driver. They don't even have a solution. All you can do is try to navigate through complexity. You can never find a solution to a complex problem. So you don't have to even search for it, but it's hard to communicate this to the public. And indeed, it becomes very scary because when complexity is high and you can't explain it to people, conspiracy theories win. That's why you easily come up with a story and some politicians take advantage of that and come up with one story and sell that to people. This is hoax, this is man-made, this is that. Now, what we can do is continuously revising our narratives, fighting back, try to repackage, try to add bits and pieces to our narratives and then inform people to tell them that this problem is composed of many things. To use the examples we have, like the pandemic example is now making systems thinking instructors helps them with teaching concepts because we have experienced it, the people have experienced it, societies have experienced it, so we can explain it. So at the end of the day, though, with all of these things I said, about internalizing the externalities, about integrated management, about addressing trade-offs, about addressing the unintended consequences would be impossible. We cannot do all those things. We will make mistakes and we cannot take control of everything. We cannot integrate everything. We cannot revise our institutions such that they become consolidated, because if we do that, then we create a dictatorship. So at the end of the day, we will have institutions, we will have conflicts between institutions, we will have conflict of interest, we will have all these problems. Yet it's important to understand and try to explain things. Now, with building narratives, the other issue is that it is important to build narratives for every society according to the value system of that society, knowledge of that society. There is a big reason for climate change narratives having no impact on many people in the developing world, because in the West we haven't understood that they're dealing with so many other things. It's easy for us to talk about the future, but it's not easy for them to think about the future because they're starving today. It's easy for us to talk about consumerism not eating meat. They're dreaming about eating meat in many places. So we have to adjust our narratives according to the values in different societies. Plus, we have to search for immediate benefits for every society. If we are thinking about long-term actions and doing things for which benefit the whole world, we also have to think about nations and boundaries in practice, about what benefit the Indian farmer will get from this solution. The Yemeni kid in the middle of war would get from this solution. The world is not all about what we think on this side of the planet. And I know a lot of us have goodwill and want to do good things, but a lot of times we miss the reality on the ground.
Yeah, so we have another question on about the sort of like virtual trade of water and in terms of the equity issue, and also what sort of international sort of action can be taken realistically against these sort of consumer drivers And is it mostly addressed by people in power, or will there has to be some sort of societal drivers of social pressure, and how would that come about?
So I think this is something, talking about who will have an impact and who we should approach or who we should count on or who we should expect to take the big decision. So before getting into policy making, I thought science policy gap is the most significant thing. But I admit that when I sat in office as a policymaker, I understood that the science society gap is also huge, and sometimes policymakers cannot take actions, the good actions, that are scientifically proven to be good, because the society is not there. It hasn't understood the narratives, that doesn't understand the value of things. So I think it's a triangle. You have to do things with both sides. It's easy to do a demonstration and say action, climate action, and all these things, but you also have to think about what societies think, and you have to ask for bottom-up changes. We have to promote bottom-up changes, because if you do that, then you increase the pressure on the shoulder of policymakers. That's how you can drive a change. Populist politicians, even dictators, think about what the society thinks. They want votes. They want to remain in power. They don't want opposition, so they try to satisfy people. Now, if you want them to be, if you change the way they think, if you change their expectations, then their reaction would be different. Now, in terms of virtual water trades. Now, part of this, yes, we can talk about it, that the world should do a better job, and we should have fair trade. We will not have fair trade in any soon. Even a lot of our environmental movements and environmental technologies, environmental friendly technologies, are not clean. What we do is that within our territories, we sell an electric car and we invent an electric car and we say it's clean. We don't talk about who suffers from in the production line. The battery that you're producing is being produced in somewhere in the developing world. People are getting the poison, the waste is remaining there, and you're not paying them for that. And they have to deal with it forever, because now we are excited about driving our electric cars on this side of the planet. So that supply chain is unfair, and transparency can change that. Do suppliers, providers, sellers like Amazon, are they interested in doing this proactively? Not really. Even though they have big programs, they proactively don't go after that. So what we can do is changing things on the consumer side. If we put pressure on them, if you are wealthy and can afford buying a different thing, if you're wealthy and can afford asking for information, if we can fight for it, then we can drive change. I need to know where this product is coming from. So made in China, what does it mean? Made in this place, what does it mean? Who was involved? Who? So virtual water trade is driven by economy. So it's an economic balance problem. It's an equilibrium. And as long as our gap is huge with the rest of the world, we buy cheap stuff. We don't pay them for that. And we sell them expensive technologies and service. That's not going to change unless we think about empowerment, we think about helping them, and donations and all these things that we do. But transparency, I think in this case, makes a big difference, and informing the people. Most of us as consumers don't know how important, how significant our decisions are, how impactful our decisions can be. If we control the demand, things can change. I always say, look at how Sweden controlled prostitution. They didn't, what they did was penalizing the buyer, not the seller. And that's a very important thing. You can't blame the oil-selling countries. Weak. Some countries that rely on oil and for their economy relies on oil production, and tell them that they have caused the problem. And forget the fact that we're still buying their oil, and we have bought their oil, and we have used their oil, and continue to buy their oil. So you're not going to change this market. Consumerism is a huge problem, and buyers in this market have a huge role. Sellers don't want us to buy less, and that's a big conflict, but we can buy less.
Yeah, so given the time, I would remind everyone that we will have a Zoom room that we can have for anyone who remains, who wants to be connected. So, and I have just posted it in the chat, and we will fit one last question in. It's in terms of how do we how would you propose to integrate institutions related to some water resources management in Iran in particular? Because a lot of powerful organizations are emphasizing a lot on the supply management side, but not so much on the demand management. And so how do we work on the institution level to address that kind of thing?
So do I answer that question here, or we go to the other room?
You can answer it here, and then after that we can move there.
It's not only Iran. It's I would say almost all countries right now. In all countries, the main focus is on supply. And the consumerism issue is a serious thing. Water utilities. If you conserve too much water utilities go bankrupt. So even water utilities don't want you to conserve too much. So there is the way we have set up our institutions and economy have actually promoted this sort of behavior, and technocratic thinking has caused this. Now, you cannot change institutions overnight. You can, though, change thinking in the long run. You can talk to people. You can remind people that things are different. Politicians, policymakers come from the society. And there are people who get educated and go to universities. As long as academics still think that the solution is on the supply side, how can you expect those people to think differently? So Iran is no exception in that regard. It's a process. It takes a long time, and all you can do is fighting back, reminding people that they have a role, reminding the policymakers that those things exist and there is a need for a change. But it's not Iran. Look at California, same thing. Look at United Arab Emirates. Look at China. Look at Europe. It's the same issue that we have. One reason for that is we are trying to solve our current problems, unprecedented problems of present time, which were created by the institutions we designed a century ago or more through the same institutions. So we want the existing institutions which cause these problems to come up with the solutions for them. The reason we have these problems is that those institutions, right? So you cannot expect a solution coming out from these institutions, because all we say is come up with an economic solution for climate change, come up with an economic solution for water shortage, water bankruptcy, and that's impossible. So we need to gradually affect these institutions, but institutions are hard to break, are hard to change. And again, look at the example of the recent election. Look at Brexit. Look at the way that the general public react to things and make big judgments. Unless you educate them, unless you inform them, unless you change their way of thinking, don't expect that the policymakers of the world be the kind angels and make revolutionary decisions at the expense of losing votes, at the expense of losing power.
Okay, great. So let's thank Dr. Madani again for his insightful presentation.